The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the kitchen as I stirred the simmering sauce. The familiar scent of basil and garlic filled the air, but today, it felt more like a reminder of everything mundane in my life. Here I was, in my late 30s, a housewife tethered to routine, and the excitement I once craved seemed to slip further away with each passing day. I glanced at the clock. Dinner would be ready soon, and Mark would be home any minute. Just another evening, I muttered to myself, stirring the sauce with a hint of frustration. The clinking of the pots and the sizzle of the food were the only sounds in the house, amplifying the silence that had settled over us like a heavy blanket. I missed laughter, spontaneity, and the thrill of something unexpected. As I set the table, the door swung open, and Mark stepped in, his briefcase in one hand and a half-hearted smile on his face. "Hey, hon. Smells amazing," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "Thanks," I replied, forcing a smile. "How was your day?" Same old, busy at work," he said, shrugging off the weight of his day as if it were a coat. I could see the fatigue in his eyes, a mirror of my own exhaustion. We exchanged a few more pleasantries, but the conversation was like a well-worn script, lacking any real connection. Just then, the doorbell rang, breaking the monotony. I opened the door to find Jake, Mark's young nephew, standing there with an easy smile and an energy that was almost palpable. He was in his early 20s, fresh-faced and brimming with vitality. "Hey, Aunt Sarah, is it okay if I crash for dinner?" he asked, his voice warm and inviting. "Of course. The more, the merrier," I replied, my heart inexplicably racing. I ushered him inside and watched as he moved around the kitchen with a confidence that was both refreshing and intoxicating. "Need any help?" Jake asked, rolling up his sleeves, revealing toned forearms that made me feel a twinge of something I hadn't felt in years. "No, I've got it," I said, a bit too quickly. "You can set the table if you want." As Jake began to help, the atmosphere in the kitchen shifted. His laughter filled the space, and I found myself smiling more genuinely. It was a stark contrast to the silence that had enveloped my home for so long. I noticed how his presence seemed to breathe life into the room, igniting a spark I thought had been extinguished forever. "Dinner's ready," I called out, and we settled around the table. Mark started talking about his day, but my attention drifted to Jake. He was animated, recounting a story about his college life, and I couldn't help but hang on to every word. Every laugh, every shared glance felt charged with an energy I hadn't realized I craved. "Can you believe my professor actually tried to teach us about existentialism while wearing flip-flops?" Jake laughed, and I found myself laughing along, my heart racing with excitement. Mark chuckled, but his eyes seemed distant, as if he was somewhere else, lost in his own thoughts. After dinner, I began clearing the table while Mark retired to the living room to watch TV. Jake stayed behind to help, and for a moment, it felt like we were in our own little world. As I washed the dishes, I felt Jake's gaze on me, and when I turned to meet his eyes, there was a spark that made my breath hitch. "Sarah," he said softly, a hint of mischief in his voice. "You really should let loose more. You're too young to be stuck in the kitchen all the time." I chuckled nervously. It's what I do best, I guess. But in that moment, I realized I wanted more than this life of monotony. My heart raced as I held his gaze, the weight of unspoken attraction hanging heavily between us. Just a lingering glance, but it felt electric, igniting something deep within me that I had long buried. "Maybe we could hang out more, just the two of us?" he suggested, his voice low, and I felt a thrill of excitement tinged with apprehension. "Yeah, maybe," I replied, my heart pounding. The innocent suggestion felt like a door opening to a world I had forgotten existed, a world filled with passion and intrigue. And as I stood there, the dishes forgotten in the sink. I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was the beginning of something I never expected, something that could change everything. As I busied myself in the kitchen, the familiar scent of garlic and rosemary filled the air, a comforting aroma that usually soothed my restless spirit. Yet today, it felt slightly suffocating, a reminder of the monotony that had settled over my life like a thick fog. I was lost in thought when I turned around, and there he was, Jake, standing in the doorway, his presence filling the room with an unexpected energy. "Oh, I didn't see you there," I said, my heart racing slightly as I wiped my hands on a dish towel. "Need something?" He leaned against the doorframe, a playful smirk dancing on his lips. "I was just looking for a snack. Smells amazing in here." I chuckled lightly, feeling a flutter of excitement. "Well, I hope you're not too picky. It's just spaghetti and meatballs tonight." "Sounds perfect to me," he replied, stepping closer. "You know, I've never seen someone make it quite like you do. It's like you put a little bit of magic into everything." His compliment hung in the air, and for a moment we just stared at each other, the tension palpable. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, and I quickly turned back to the stove, stirring the sauce with a little more vigor than necessary. "Magic, huh? I guess it must be the secret family recipe," I said, trying to keep my voice light, though I could feel my pulse quickening. "Maybe it's you who's the magic," he shot back, his gaze piercing into mine. "You bring a certain spark to everything." "Jake, you're just being charming," I replied, though I couldn't help the smile that crept onto my face. "Save it for the girls at the bar." He shrugged, his expression shifting slightly. "Is it wrong to appreciate beauty, even if it's just in the kitchen?" Before I could respond, he reached out, brushing his fingers against mine as he grabbed a plate. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through me, and I quickly pulled my hand away. "I should probably finish dinner," I said, my voice a bit shaky. "Right, of course," he murmured, though his eyes lingered on me, a playful glint in them. "But I'm here if you need help, you know." I felt a rush of heat at his words, a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. "I've got it under control," I insisted, though I knew I was lying. The last thing I wanted was for him to leave the kitchen. As I prepared the meal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was dancing on the edge of something dangerous. My mind wandered back to the dinner table just a few nights ago when I had caught his gaze, the way he'd smiled at me as if we shared a secret. I shook my head to clear my thoughts, reminding myself of my marriage, my responsibilities. The door creaked open again and Mark stepped in, oblivious to the charged atmosphere. "Hey, I'm back," he called out, his voice cheerful as he set his briefcase down. "Dinner's almost ready," I replied, forcing a smile as I felt Jake step back, his playful demeanor shifting to something more cautious. "Jake, you're still here?" Mark said, glancing between us. "I thought you'd left." "I was just helping Sarah with dinner," Jake replied smoothly, though I could see the slight tension in his shoulders. "Great, I appreciate it," Mark said, his attention shifting away from us. As he talked about his day, I felt the weight of expectation settle back over me. Jake's presence had been a fleeting escape, a momentary spark in my otherwise dull reality. After dinner, as I cleared the table, I caught Jake's eye again. A fleeting moment passed between us, a lingering connection that made my heart race. "I'll see you tomorrow?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah, tomorrow," I replied, trying to sound casual, but my heart was pounding. I was aware that this was wrong, that every moment spent with him was a step deeper into a treacherous game, yet I couldn't quell the thrill it brought. As I finished cleaning up, my thoughts drifted to the forbidden excitement that Jake stirred in me. The more I resisted, the stronger the desire grew. I had to remind myself of my vows, my commitment to Mark, but the allure of Jake's attention was intoxicating. I was caught in a tempest of emotions, guilt, desire, and an unfamiliar longing that beckoned me to step into the unknown. Our kitchen was dimly lit, the soft glow of the pendant lights casting a warm hue over the chaos of our last-minute dinner preparations. I felt a mix of anticipation and dread as I wiped my hands on a dish towel, the fabric absorbing the moisture, but not the tension in the air. Mark had left for his business trip just that morning, and I was left with a house that echoed with silence, save for the bubbling of the pasta on the stove. As I stirred the pot, my mind wandered back to Jake. Our accidental touches, the lingering gazes. It was all still so fresh. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. "Get a grip, Sarah," I muttered to myself. The last thing I needed was to fantasize about my husband's charming nephew. But the truth was, I was drawn to him like a moth to a flame. Just then I heard the front door creak open, and I turned to see Jake stepping into the kitchen, his presence instantly igniting a warmth in my chest. "Hey, I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his boyish grin making my heart skip a beat. "No, not at all. Just making some dinner," I replied, trying to sound casual. "You're just in time to help me with the salad." He sauntered over, and I could feel the heat radiating off him as he stood closer than necessary. "What can I do?" he asked, eyeing the ingredients scattered across the counter. "Just chop the cucumbers if you don't mind," I said, handing him a knife. His fingers brushed against mine, and an electric shock coursed through me. I quickly turned away, focusing on the tomatoes as I cut them into small pieces, the knife moving mechanically as my heart raced. "You know," Jake said, breaking the silence, "I've always thought you were an amazing cook. Mark is lucky." His tone was teasing, but there was a weight behind his words that made my stomach churn. "Thanks, I guess," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But cooking is just another chore at this point." I glanced up to find him watching me, his gaze intense, and I felt a rush of heat rise to my cheeks. "Chores can be boring. I think you need a little excitement in your life," he said, a hint of mischief dancing in his eyes. The air thickened between us, and I could feel the gravity of the moment pulling me closer to him. "Excitement?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you suggest?" Before I could fully process my thoughts, Jake took a step closer, his body almost pressing against mine. "Maybe we should make our own fun," he said softly, leaning in as if he were about to share a secret. In that moment, I felt a wave of reckless abandon wash over me. I didn't think, I just acted. I closed the distance between us and pressed my lips against his, the kiss igniting a fire that I had buried deep within. It was thrilling and terrifying, a moment of weakness that shattered the walls I had built around my heart. As we pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed, reality crashed back in. "What have we done?" I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake's expression mirrored my own mixture of surprise and desire. I don't know," he stammered, running a hand through his hair. "But it felt right, didn't it?" "Right? It's wrong, Jake. I'm married," I exclaimed, panic rising within me. I took a step back, distancing myself from the intoxicating pull of his presence, but my body still ached for him. "I know. But you can't deny the chemistry between us," he replied, his voice low and earnest. "We can keep it between us just for a while. No one has to know." I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. "I can't do this," I insisted, but the longing in his eyes made my resolve waver. But deep down, I knew I was already in too deep. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was the beginning of something dangerous, something that could unravel everything I had built with Mark. The thrill of the forbidden made my heart race, but the weight of guilt was already starting to settle in my chest. "Let's just forget it happened," I finally whispered, my voice trembling. Jake nodded slowly, but the spark between us lingered, a dangerous reminder of the choices I was beginning to contemplate. As I stood in the kitchen, the remnants of our family gathering scattered around me. I felt a weight pressing down on my chest. The laughter and chatter of my family still echoed in my mind, but all I could focus on was the tension that simmered beneath the surface between Jake and me. I glanced over at him, leaning casually against the counter, a playful smile dancing on his lips. He was so effortlessly charming, so full of life, and I couldn't help but feel drawn to him, like a moth to a flame. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "You know, I think you should host more family gatherings. You're the glue that holds us all together." His compliment sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt an inexplicable thrill at the thought of us being more than just aunt and nephew. "Maybe," I replied, trying to keep my tone light, though the heat creeping into my cheeks betrayed me. "But I think you might just be saying that because you like the food." I was teasing him, but deep down, I was aware of how much I craved his attention. Jake stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking. "I wouldn't mind if you cooked for me alone sometime," he suggested, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach flip. I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar rush of desire coursing through me, battling against the guilt that loomed like a dark cloud over my thoughts. "Jake, we shouldn't," I started, but my voice faltered. The truth was, I wanted to. I wanted to lose myself in him, to escape the monotony of my life, if only for a fleeting moment. He reached out, brushing a stray hair behind my ear, and the electrifying contact sent warmth radiating through my body. "Just one dinner," he coaxed, his breath warm against my skin. "No one has to know." The moment was intoxicating, and as I gazed into his eyes, I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to crumble. I was reminded of the last argument Mark and I had, the harsh words exchanged, the silence that followed. Our marriage felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating me with its weight. I looked back at Jake, and in that instant, I made my choice. "Okay," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. "Just one dinner." The days that followed were a whirlwind of anticipation and nervous energy. I found myself daydreaming about our time together, imagining what it would feel like to be free, unburdened by my responsibilities and the expectations of being a wife. I felt alive again, a feeling I thought I had lost forever. Finally, the night arrived. I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal, but my heart raced with each passing moment. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep breath before answering it. Jake stood there, looking effortlessly handsome in a fitted t-shirt and jeans that hugged his form just right. "Wow, it smells amazing in here," he said, stepping inside. His presence filled the space, and I could feel the air crackling with unspoken tension. "Thanks. I hope it tastes as good as it smells," I replied, trying to maintain a casual demeanor. We chatted and laughed as we shared the meal, the atmosphere charged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. After dinner, we moved to the living room, and I realized I was sitting dangerously close to him on the couch. As we talked, the conversation flowed naturally, but my heart was pounding in my chest. The playful banter quickly escalated into something more, and I felt his hand brush against mine, sending shivers down my spine. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice low and inviting, "I can't stop thinking about you." I turned to him, my breath hitching in my throat. "Jake, we shouldn't—" But the protest felt weak, even to my own ears. Before I could finish, he leaned in, capturing my lips with his in a kiss that ignited a fire within me. The world around us melted away, and in that moment, all my fears and doubts vanished. I kissed him back, pouring all the pent-up desire and frustration into that one heated exchange. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, and reality crashed down around me like a tidal wave. I knew the path I was on was dangerous, but the thrill of being wanted, of feeling desired, was intoxicating. As I gazed into his eyes, I realized I was at a crossroads, teetering on the edge of a decision that could change everything. The weight of my guilt felt heavier than ever as I paced the kitchen, the familiar scent of fresh coffee mixing with the lingering aroma of the dinner I had prepared for Mark. I glanced at the clock. He was supposed to be home any minute now. My heart raced as I thought about Jake. The more I tried to suppress my feelings for him, the more they seemed to bloom in the dark corners of my mind. I knew I had to end it, but every time I thought of saying goodbye, I felt a pang of regret that sent my heart reeling. Sarah? The sound of Mark's voice pulled me from my reverie. I quickly composed myself, forcing a smile as I turned to face him. Hey, honey, how was your day? I asked, trying to sound casual. Mark shrugged, his brow furrowed with the weight of his own thoughts. Same old, same old. You know how it is. He grabbed a mug and poured himself some coffee, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I sighed, wanting to confide in him, but the words felt trapped in my throat. Just then the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who it would be. I exchanged a quick glance with Mark, who looked puzzled. Are you expecting someone? He asked. No, I'll get it, I said. Wandaker Canada, sir. Said my voice a little too high-pitched as I rushed to the door. When I opened it, Jake stood there, a lopsided grin on his face that made my stomach flutter. Hey, Sarah, I thought I'd drop by, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Jake, this isn't a good time, I whispered urgently, glancing back toward the kitchen where Mark was still pouring his coffee. But Jake didn't seem to register my discomfort. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice low. Come on. Just a few minutes. I miss you. I felt my resolve weaken as I stared into his bright blue eyes. The memories of our stolen moments flooded back. Our laughter, the kisses, the way he made me feel alive again. I knew I should push him away, but the magnetic pull was too strong. Sarah? Mark's voice broke through the moment and I felt a rush of panic. Just a second, I called back, my heart racing. I turned to Jake, who looked unfazed. You need to go. Now. Why? What's the harm in a little chat? He pressed, stepping closer. I could feel the heat radiating off him, and it made my head spin. I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. This is wrong, Jake. I can't do this anymore. His expression shifted from playful to serious in an instant. You don't mean that, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We have something special. You can't just throw that away. I have to think about Mark, I replied, my voice trembling. The thought of my husband, of everything we had built together, weighed heavily on me. This isn't just about us. But Jake stepped closer, reaching out to grasp my wrist gently. What if I told you I love you, Sarah? What if I begged you to reconsider? My breath caught in my throat as I looked up at him, his gaze intense and sincere. I felt a rush of desire, but alongside it a wave of guilt crashed over me. Jake, please. Before I could finish, the front door swung open and Mark stepped into the room. The look on his face shifted from confusion to shock as he took in the scene before him. Me, standing too close to Jake, his hand still on my wrist. Sarah? Mark's voice was laced with disbelief. What the hell is going on? Time seemed to freeze as I realized the gravity of the situation. Mark, I can explain. I started, but he cut me off. Explain what? That you've been cheating on me with my nephew? His voice rose, a mixture of anger and betrayal flooding his features. Mark, please, it's not what you think, I pleaded, but I could hear the tremor in my own voice, the cracks forming in my carefully constructed facade. I trusted you, he shouted, and in that moment, every ounce of shame and regret I had been suppressing bubbled to the surface. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly lost. "Mark, I'm so sorry," I said, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I never wanted to hurt you. You just what? Wanted a thrill? Is that it?" His words cut deep, and I felt the weight of my decisions crashing down on me. Jake stepped forward, trying to intervene. "Mark, let's talk about this." "Stay out of this, Jake," Mark snapped, his eyes blazing. "This is between me and Sarah." I stood there caught in the crossfire of their anger, and for a moment I felt utterly helpless. The world I had known was crumbling around me, and I realized there was no escaping the consequences of my choices. The truth was out, and all I could do was brace for the inevitable fallout. I stood in the dimly lit living room, my heart heavy as I watched Mark pace back and forth, his brow furrowed with disbelief. The revelation of my affair hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating and inescapable. "Sarah, how could you?" he finally said, his voice trembling, a mix of anger and heartbreak. I could barely meet his gaze, feeling the weight of my betrayal settle on my shoulders like a shroud. I don't know," I stammered, tears welling in my eyes. "I just felt so lost. We haven't been us in so long." Mark stopped abruptly, his eyes blazing with a hurt that cut deeper than any knife. "And you thought sleeping with my nephew was the answer? You've shattered everything we've built together." "I didn't mean for it to happen," I pleaded, wanting desperately to explain the tangled mess of emotions inside me. "It was a moment of weakness. I thought what? That it wouldn't matter? That I wouldn't find out?" His voice rose, echoing in the empty spaces of our home. Before I could respond, he pulled out his phone, his fingers flying over the screen. My stomach knotted. Was he going to call Jake? "I need some air," he said, slamming the door behind him. The sound reverberated through the house, leaving me alone with my guilt and despair. I sank onto the couch, feeling the tears escape as I buried my face in my hands. The weight of my actions pressed down on me, but a small part of me felt relief. I had confessed. I had unburdened myself. But that relief was short-lived. I glanced over at Mark's phone, still lying on the table, and my curiosity gnawed at me. I picked it up, my heart racing, and scrolled through his messages. My breath caught when I saw a thread from a contact labeled M. My best friend, Emily. I felt a chill run down my spine as I opened it, my fingers trembling. The messages were intimate, filled with laughter and flirtation, but one stood out. "I can't wait to see you again. Just you and me." "No, no, no," I whispered to myself, a wave of nausea crashing over me. I couldn't breathe as the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Mark had been unfaithful too. Anger surged through me, mixing with the hurt, and I felt the room spin. I grabbed my phone and dialed Emily's number, my hands shaking with rage. "Sarah?" she answered, her voice all sweetness. "Don't you dare play innocent with me," I shot back, my voice colder than I intended. "I saw your messages with Mark." There was a pause, a silence thick with tension. I don't know what you're talking about." "Cut the crap, Emily. You've been sleeping with my husband." Her denial crumbled into nervous laughter. "It's not what you think, Sarah. We were just what? Having fun behind my back? You're supposed to be my best friend." I screamed, the betrayal slicing deeper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally admitted, her voice quivering. I felt a mix of fury and heartbreak. I couldn't believe this was happening. I had lost both my husband and my best friend in one fell swoop. "Just stay away from me," I spat, hanging up the call. Laughter echoed in my mind, memories of shared secrets and laughter morphing into bitter reminders of betrayal. I was standing at a crossroads, my life in tatters. As I leaned back against the couch, my phone buzzed, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. It was a text from Jake. "Can we meet? I need to see you." My heart raced, torn between the thrill of the forbidden and the wreckage of my life. I could feel the pull of Jake's offer, a dangerous temptation in the wake of my shattered world. But could I really go back to him after everything that had happened? I glanced out the window, the night sky dark and foreboding. The choices I faced felt impossibly heavy, but I knew one thing for certain. This web of deception had only begun to unravel, and I was standing at the center, ready to make a choice that could change everything.